to the next lecture on U.S. history. This is period 3, and this is the Revolution, and really sort of the beginnings of the American Revolution. So we've got a changed relationship between the Crown and the colonists, and for the Crown, they need money from the colonists. They're sort of questioning, who really has control over us? And they're proud to be part of the British Empire. They're proud to be Englishmen, but at the same time, they very much have questions of authority, and so these two are going to come to a head. Okay, so the British, they initiated with the law, the Stamp Act, which was to raise money and to raise money for the war. It was very expensive for them. They won the war by borrowing lots of money. And so it was a direct tax. It was a very visible tax on anything that had to have a stamp on it. And it was not a very heavy tax. It wasn't expensive. It was less than what people in England paid. They had the exact same tax, but they paid more. So from the British point of view, this is a very reasonable thing. And they thought this would be fine and that they would help to raise some money. But from the colonist point of view, this was just completely unacceptable, and they immediately protest and organize against it. Okay, so from their point of view, this is a violation of their natural rights. Their natural rights as Englishmen. It's written down within the English Constitution. The rights that people have, and one of those is the right to representation. And the colonists have representation in their colonial governments. And so they feel that they are the only ones who have the authority, have the right to levy a tax on them, and the British Parliament, way over on the other side of the Atlantic, does not have the authority to do this. So it's a simple question of who has the power to control them. Okay, that's what it is early on. Now, the protests against them, they are really strong and they're really united, especially in Boston. And it's in Boston that we get the strongest protests. First, an organization is created known as the Sons of Liberty to organize the protests. It's led by Samuel Adams. He is a cousin of John Adams, the second president of the future United States. They harass, they bully those people who were responsible to collect the tax, and they made it very difficult for the tax collector to actually get your money. So it could be quite dangerous and fearful to be a tax collector at this time. All colonial governments objected to the tax. They all came together, Georgia, Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, and so on, to say that this tax is not allowed. It just can't be. And finally, a British boycott is established. So they refuse to buy any manufactured goods from Britain. And so this hurt the British merchants in their pocketbooks, and those merchants have the ears of the British government. So it's a way to sort of get their voice heard, and it was heard. Okay, the British government does hear it. Just a side note, to have a look at this quite famous drawing from the times of the mob violence in Boston that was brewing and that was used against some of the British tax collectors. This is from a real event of a tax collector who was tarred and feathered, meaning you cover the person in the hot, gooey, black tar, the stuff that we put on our roads, which is often used in wood ships to seal it. So you cover it in yourself in this, or cover the person in this sticky black goo, and then throw feathers onto them, and then you parade them through the streets, and people jeer and yell at the person. It's extremely humiliating event to do this to a person. Now, if you notice in this picture, the noose, the mob, there, he's got the feathers. There they are dumping British goods into the ocean. This is the point of view of the people loyal to the British government, of saying, they're just angry mobs, and they don't have any reason. They're just reacting with violence. And so this divided those who are against the Stamp Act in the colonies, between those who want to fight it with reason, with logic, with words, with peaceful legal protests like a boycott, and not with this kind of violence, which did exist, the mob violence. So a guy like John Adams would look at this and just be disgusted with this, and he'd say, these people don't speak for me. I don't like the Stamp Act, but at the same time, I don't like this mob violence as well. All right, so the British government is like, whoa, they did not like that Stamp Act, and so they repeal it. Okay, but at the same time, they did announce and say to the colonies, yeah, we took it away, but we could always put it back. We have the power. We have authority over you, and this is where it sort of gets to where it's a question over taxes. To now, it's really a bigger issue over who has control over the colonies, and each side failing to listen to the other side. It's an argument where everybody's yelling and nobody's listening, and that's not going to be resolved in a good way, because this could have just been really resolved with a meeting of representatives from each side, of just working out some kind of an agreement. It's just a question over representation in government. It's as simple as that. But their failure to listen to the other side's point of view is going to turn it into so much more than this. Okay, so the British, failing to learn the lesson, put in another tax. This time it's indirect, meaning that it's a tax on trade. It's a tariff. So customers will be paying this tax through higher prices, but you don't necessarily see the tax. Much like when you go buy something at 7-Eleven, you are paying a sales tax. You don't necessarily notice it, but you are. It's an indirect tax. And you get the same reaction. Not a surprise. Hey, you're taxing us. You can't do this. You didn't learn. And so the organized protests again, boycotts and spinning bees. Mothers and housewives and daughters getting together to spin cloth because they're refusing to buy it from England, so they got to get their clothes from somewhere. So it's just a way again to organize protests, and it's within this volatile sort of mix that we get some violence and state violence against the people. An event known as the Boston Massacre, where a group of red-coated soldiers, British soldiers, stationed in Boston, fire upon a crowd, killing 4, and it just fuels the propaganda, fuels those people who have that loud voice against the British, that they are evil, that it's a conspiracy of tyrants to rule over us. When in fact, if you're to look at the point of view of these soldiers, they're young, they're panicky, and they were the victims of snowballs being thrown at them, filled with little rocks and ice, and constant taunting and jeering, and somebody in that crowd jeering them on, fire, fire. And one of the soldiers, young soldiers, panics and does fire, and then they all shoot. And before the commander can stop, the leader, what are you doing? And they stopped firing, and 4 lay dead. And the soldiers were put on trial for murder in Boston. Angry crowd wants to see them hung from a tree, and John Adams steps forward as a lawyer and defends them and proves their innocence, that that it wasn't malicious, it wasn't on purpose, it was completely an accident by a scared group of young soldiers. But that's irrelevant, really. It's used as propaganda. It's used to further this narrative of this tyrannical British, and it leads to more communication and organization amongst people who want to take stronger action against the British. And the formation of the Committee of Correspondence, a Facebook group you might call it today. Hey, let's join up in communication of letters, because at the time, there's not really any much system of communication between the various colonies. So that's what the Committee of Correspondence is created to do. It's another view of the attack. One of the dead was a free black, by the way. He was the first to die. And it's at this time that we get the Boston Tea Party, famous event where it's about taxes on tea, and the British East India Company being exempt from that tax. They don't have to pay the tax on tea. And the British colonies, again, it's the same thinking. They're taxing us. They can't do this. And their form of protest is to organize very deliberately to go onto the ships at night of the British East India Company, seize their tea, and throw it and ruin it into the Boston Harbor. And it was not symbolic. It was a lot of tea, a lot, very valuable. In today's dollars, you're talking into the tens of millions of dollars. And the British East India Company, it's not just a company, it's an arm of the British Empire. It's an arm of the British government. And, the British king has an investment in it. And so this is a direct attack at the heart of the power of the British Empire in a very real and personal way. And so the response from the British government is, you think you have the power? No, it's the British Empire. The British have the power, not you little insignificant colonies. And the heavy hand comes down. What would be called in the colonies the intolerable acts. And so now things have gone to just a little argument over the right to tax and little taxes. Now it's become much more. Okay, so the first thing that they do is they close down the port of Boston. Now think today if there are protests in Hong Kong against the Chinese government over issues of power and control. Imagine the Beijing government closing the port of Hong Kong and the shockwaves that would send throughout Hong Kong and throughout the world. And that's what happened. They closed the port. Very serious move on the part of the British government. They put Boston under the control of the military. They place in martial law, so they take away people's natural rights. British soldiers are placed within the city, and anybody arrested, and they are going to go after the ringleaders. You're not going to be under a jury trial in Boston. You're going to be sent over to Britain to be found guilty, whether or not you are. And at the same time, just their refusal to sort of consider the points of view and the thinking of the colonies separate to all this, that's when they make a ruling on how they're going to govern Quebec. And the colonies are not pleased. They say to the people of Quebec, the French Canadians, you've got your religious freedom. You're free to practice your Catholic faith. To the anti-Catholic people of the colonies, particularly up in Boston, the descendants of the Puritans, this is outrageous. And then they extend the border of Quebec to include Ohio. What the heck? Just bad timing on the part of the British Empire that you get this. So this spurs the colonists to meet. And all of them to meet. They all send representatives to Philadelphia. John Adams is there representing Massachusetts. And they sit down and they write up a document, a Declaration of Rights, as they call it. And they say, hey, we got the right to self-government. Massachusetts, we got your back. And, if this escalates into war, then so be it. and but many sort of understand, there's still not all that united. There's no talk still of independence. That's not even on their minds, was not even discussed at all. So we get some fighting. Okay, Lexington and Concord. I'm not going to spend much time on this. There's around Boston. There's a fight between British regulars, soldiers, the redcoats, and militia, a group of farm boys with muskets, and fighting occurs, and so the Congress meets again. There's Lexington and Concord. They meet again, and this is the big one. The big players are there. John Adams is representing Massachusetts. Benjamin Franklin is one of the delegates from Pennsylvania. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington are both there representing Virginia, amongst others. And they meet in Philadelphia at Liberty Hall, as it's now called. You can go visit it if you so wish. And now independence is sort of on the blocks as a question. John Adams is suggesting it. He's suggesting each colony independent on their own declare independence, so that we'd have 13 individual countries forming. And but most colonists, is still not really there. He's not in the majority yet. But where he is able to get them agreed on is, we need to get organized with the military. And John Adams nominates George Washington, who is accepted. George Washington is a natural leader. He's still kind of young. He's a military guy, and he's the tallest guy in the room wherever he goes. And he sort of gravitates to the center as a natural leader, and he's chosen. And they start acting like a government. They set up foreign affairs to talk to France, talk to Spain. You with us or not? Like what will it take? To maybe get you to join in on our side. They start printing their own money, and so they start acting like a unified government in some ways. But again, still not independence. We get some more fighting. Battle of Bunker Hill. It's in and around Boston. And what the Congress does decide to do is to send off one final, let's sit down and talk. And they call it the Olive Branch Petition, an olive branch being a symbol of peace. And it's hoping that they can just sit down with the king. But the King George III, he doesn't even read it. He just sends back no, and orders a blockade. And this is spurring them, one of the spurs to get Congress to go towards independence. And another thing that really helped at this time was the publication of a book or a pamphlet known as called Common Sense. It was written by a guy called Thomas Paine, and a short, simple argument of why independence is the right thing. It's a pro-Republican, anti-monarchy, persuasive essay of arguing, why should little old Britain be controlling a colony way over here? It just doesn't make sense. And common sense would be to declare independence. It lays down the philosophical arguments in favor of Republican Enlightenment ideas, and everybody either read it or knew of it. And, to be the guy of like, I've never heard of common sense, like, people sort of look at you like funny, like, wait, you haven't even heard of it? Everybody heard it. And so this spurs them towards finally declaring independence. And so in the summer of 1776, they do vote, and they vote unanimously. It was hard to get them to vote unanimously. I believe New York even abstained from voting, so they didn't vote yes or no either way. They're the most loyal to the British Crown. They ask a young Thomas Jefferson. He's known as a pretty good writer. They ask him to write it, and Ben Franklin, John Adams edited it. They offered a few suggestions, not much, and put that in there. Thomas Jefferson did, in his original draft, include arguments against slavery, but to appease the Southern delegates, they take that out of it. Now, the Declaration of Independence, strongly encourage you to maybe have a look at it. It's perhaps the best persuasive essay ever written. That's essentially what it is. It's strongly based on the ideas of John Locke, and it's a list of rights and complaints. So he sort of lays out, we have our natural rights. You might call them untakeawayable rights, inalienable rights is the way that he went them, to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and that we have the people can obey governments that protect us. We're in a sort of a social contract, and if governments are not protecting us, as he would argue the British government isn't, then we get the right to remove it and form a new form of government that you can do this. And so he lays this out at the beginning and then says, okay, so has the British government going against us? Well, yes, they have. And then he lists out like 100 different complaints about things that the British government has done over the past 10 years that are going against their liberties. And it's then signed. And you can see prominently down there is John Hancock. He was the first and the biggest. And he said, I want the king to see my name on there. And now it's an expression to say to somebody, I need your John Hancock on this, is saying, I need you to sign your name onto it. It's being sort of passed into lore. This was painted, but this is just not true. The delegates were kind of busy. They were in and out. They were in meetings and other things, and all of them sort of signed it over July 2nd, July 3rd, July 4th. There's never a time when they all just got together and signed it, but that's sort of the impression that was given. And they knew what they were doing. They knew that there's no going back from this point, and that if they failed in their endeavor, they know this means war, and if they fail in this war, it means to them death. If they are captured, they will be hung. They are traitors. This is treason. This is pretty damn serious what they're doing, and they're fully aware of the consequences of the war that is to come against the world's superpower, the British and the British Navy. And it divided the people in the colonies. You got to stand up and pick a side. Are you going to be loyal to the English king, as loyalists would be called, or are you going to be a patriot to what's in some circles now being called the American colonies, as one, the Americas? And half the people really, who's going to win? Maybe I'll go with that side. Let's kind of wait and see. Yeah, so most sort of stayed silent on this side. So we'll just end by looking at who's likely to be on which side. So loyalists are more likely to be, upper class, merchants, people who have a lot to lose. Would most likely stay in the loyalist camp because they're pretty certain that Britain will win the war. You're betting early on. You might want to bet on the British winning the war. But we'll look at that, why that's maybe not so much the case. They look at, they're more likely, they think the Crown will protect their rights than a future American government. Elderly people, in the Anglican Church, much more likely. And the more rural and distant from these events, the more likely you might be, what's going on, kind of idea as well. And Boston was the heaviest of being not loyalist, patriot, but New York had a lot of loyalists because we just want to trade, is kind of the idea. The patriots, they're hoping for better economic opportunity by breaking out of that mercantilist system. They take on the ideas of republicanism. The non-English Americans tend to be much more in favor, like the Germans, immigrants as well. And younger people. Revolutions are done by younger people, and especially up in around Boston and New England, where you have the strongest. Okay, so war's on. That's the war itself is a matter for another lecture. All right, so thank you very much.